Recording in process, guys. Hello, welcome back. Another week, another Parsha Pearls, another jam-packed, amazing schedule that we're going to break down together. First things first, I really should start this way every week, but this week it's a particular special mention to my wife, who has a bigger hand in everything that I do than you would probably believe. Or well, you probably do believe it. She's amazing, and really couldn't do this stuff without her. So she helps with the support with the kids and the content and literally everything. So big thank you to the Mrs. Miri. I don't know if she's even listening, but thank you. So, okay, we're going to start off with a question, and it's not a trick question, but it is a quick question. Trick question. What is tzara'at? Any guesses? Translate that for me. David, go.
Some kind of leprosy.
No, it's not leprosy. It is definitely not. Sorry?
A skin disease.
It's a skin disease, yes. And Neil, I didn't know why everyone called it leprosy. You know, I mean, leprosy firstly is contagious. And tzara'as, which is this week's Tazria, is all about the mystical illness of tzara'as. Is not infectious. You know, you can hug a guy with tzara'as, you're not going to catch it. If you hug a guy with leprosy, which I don't recommend, you might catch that. But I was always intrigued. Why do we call it leprosy? Like, where did that translation come from? And I found out. Get this. In the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament, tzara'at, which is sort of, I guess this is one of the earliest translations of the Bible that we have. Tzara'at was translated as lepra. And lepra means rough or scaly. And that is not such a bad translation. The words used to describe tzara'as do have a translation of being rough and scaly. So that's not such a problem. So to translate tzara'as as lepra into Greek is not incorrect. But when it got translated from Greek into English, they didn't understand what lepra was, or they just assumed that it was referring to leprosy. So it's actually not leprosy, which is what we call today Hansen's disease, but it's something completely different. And another, mind-blowing differentiation between leprosy and tzara'as is you can't get leprosy on a house. You can't get leprosy on your clothes. They're not impacted by that disease at all. It's a completely different kettle of fish. So now that we've got it out of the way, and we are going to tell everyone that if you want to translate tzara'as as lepra, as the Greek, meaning rough or scaly, you're going to be very snobby, but probably correct. But your best bet is to go with Neil's translation, which is something like skin disease. But David, it's not your fault. Everyone seems to say it's leprosy. And it's just another, I found the pet peeve of misleading translations, and that's just another one. So apologies for society, but we are now in the know.
It's Cecil B. DeMille in Ben-Hur. His two sisters get leprosy, and so it's quite a.
Leprosy back in the day, there were leper colonies, and it was like a big deal. Now it's not like you just get treated, and it's. I spent an inordinate amount of time researching leprosy today, so I'll be your expert for this week. But that's tzara'as, and that's not leprosy, and it gets a bad rep. You know, this is what we're going to start off with. tzara'as, it gets a bad rep. People think of it, and understandably so. You know, anyone with this disease on their skin has to leave the camps, and it's a tough time for them. Famous people in the Torah, like Moshe and Miriam, who've got tzara'as, had it as a criticism. And tzara'as generally is avoided. It's avoided like the plague, if you'll pardon the pun. But I want to tell you guys, it's not all that bad. tzara'as has its perks, and intentionally and structurally too. Let's see that. Let's see this. We're going to explore two positives of tzara'as. The first one is not my typical style. I feel like we're getting used to my style of shiurim and ideas. This is not so my style, but I really enjoyed it. So tell me what you think. Source number one, Vayikra. This week's Tazria, Parshat Tazria. Here we go. It says, "Adam ki yihye ba'or b'sorei," a person who has on his skin se'is oy sapachas oy baheres, a rash, a discoloration, and it develops into a scaly affection of the skin or of the body. That, by the way, is the lepra that the Greeks were talking about when they translated the Chumash. So that's where they got this lepra, meaning rough or scaly, from. But it goes onto your skin. and it comes lenega tzaras, and they bring it to Aaron the priest or one of his sons who are also priests. Fine, fantastic. So you have tzaras, which is this sort of skin affliction, as Neil pointed out, and it's on your skin. Now, it's very interesting that it's on the skin, because the word or that I've put in bold here, aleph, ayin vav resh, sorry, is a very versatile word. And it can mean, basically speaking, three things. It can mean skin, as it means here. It can mean a skin, but it can also mean a light. It can mean, or is a light. And it can also mean the same word, the same letters, ayin vav resh, spell iver, which means to be blind. So it means skin, light, and blind. What on earth have those three got to do with each other? We're going to find out. You see, the Sfas Emes says that when Adam was created, the first man is created, we know that he didn't look like we look today. And there's a lot of ink spilled on the description of the first man. One of the sources tell us that he was made of light. He was made of a fire almost. And this is it's very perplexing, because obviously he was made of earth. So how could he have been made of fire? So how does that work? He looked like we look to a degree. So what does that mean? And the Sfas Emes says that when you looked at Adam before he did that sin and ate from the forbidden tree, you could see the spiritual element to a human coursing through his veins. He literally glowed with spirituality. And you would look at a human being as they were first formed, and you would see the spirituality there. Now, what happened when Adam eats from the forbidden tree is that gets murky. It gets dimmed, and it's reflected, we know this, in the fallout of the eating from the tree. See source number 2. It says, Vayas Hashem Elokim la'adam le'ishtay kisnais or vayalbishem. He made them clothes of skin. So that light that Adam had first been clothed in gets replaced by something with almost the same word, meaning skin, and it's a downgrade. It's gone from light, or meaning light, to or meaning skin. And that means when we see it human today, we don't see that spiritual entity. We don't see the spiritual element of them coursing through their veins. We don't see it anymore. And that's because it got dimmed, it got covered, and that light became or, became skin. But the Sfas Emes says, but let's not give up hope just there, because skin, we know, isn't necessarily a complete block. It's slightly permeable. For example, if you rub a cream into your skin, it's gonna sink into your body. Your hair comes out through the skin. You have, sweat and all these other things that come through the skin. It's not a completely solid shield. And he says that sometimes you will see that spiritual or, meaning light, coming through the physical or, meaning skin. And Tzaras was one of those times. This is why this affliction came out on the skin, because it was a little reminder, a little window into the light of the past that we used to shine with. It was an or of meaning light coming through the or meaning skin, because it was a spiritual sensitivity. And we don't have Tzaras today. And it's a shame, because we don't live with that spiritual awareness and that spiritual reality that they used to. It used to be you did something wrong and your skin would react. Your body couldn't stomach that sin that you'd done, or that mistake that you'd made, or that wrong thing that whatever it was. Your body reacted, and it was much more sensitive and much more spiritually attuned. Now, unfortunately, we've lost that. But Tzaras, it's true it indicated Averos, and it's true indicated sin. But at the end of the day, it was a time when we had a greater spiritual sensitivity through our bodies. And so Tzaras, as far as point number 1 goes, is not so bad, and it indicated the time when we were all connected to Hashem. But there's something, and this really gets me going. There's something that's even more symbolic and hopeful and meaningful about Tzaras. And this is just, imagine you move into a new house. Imagine you moved into a new country. Imagine you're the Jewish people, You've been walking into the promised land, or been trying to get to the promised land for 40 years in the desert. You finally get there. And guess what? It says in Vayikra 14:34 that Kisavayu al Eretz Canaan, Ashani Noising Lachem La'achuzah. When you get to the land of Canaan, Eretz Yisrael, the promised land that I have given you as a possession, V'nosati negot sara'as, bebeis Eretz Achuzas. And you're going to finally get there, and your house is going to have tzara'as. And you know, what did I do? I literally just moved in. Why is God smiting me down with this plague on my house? What's going on? And it doesn't end there, because the next few psukim after that go on to talk about what happens when your house has tzara'as, and it culminates in this, source number 4. It says, and the house shall be torn down, and its stones and timber and all the coating on the house, and taken to an impure place outside the city. You've just moved into Israel, and you have to break your house, wreck it, and then schlep it all the way out. Welcome to Israel, folks. How's it going? You know, they say a joke about Netanyahu. He gets to the world to come. And they say, you know, you're going to hell. Unfortunately, you haven't been such a good boy. And he gets there, and there's harps playing music, and there's green grass swaying gently in the wind. There's birds chirping, and there's buffet tables laid out. And he says, you know what? This hell thing isn't so terrible after all. And Mr. Netanyahu gets settled down. And after about 15 minutes, all of a sudden, a wildfire breaks out. Demons appear swinging from the trees. The sky darkens. The sun goes red. Lava explodes from the floor. And everyone's screaming and having a thoroughly awful time. And Netanyahu turns to an officiating demon and says, what do you mean? This wasn't the hell I was in 10 minutes ago. And the demon says, until now, you were an oleh. And now you're a full-blown citizen. So, you know, you get to Israel and you think it's going to be amazing. And before you know it, you're schlepping your house down the road in pieces. This whole tzara'as gig. Why is Hashem giving us tzara'as as soon as we move into Israel? And this is premeditated, guy. Hashem says, by the way, I'm warning you. You're going to get to Israel and your house is going to have some stuff on it. And you're going to have to dismantle it. What is going on? What's this whole, what's Hashem playing at? To answer this, we have to go to a question I had on the Megillah, which bothered me for ages until I found an answer. All right, this is Megillah Purim. We just had it. Look at source number 5 with me. Esther is getting ready to meet Achashverosh formally. You know, she's been brought in as one of his prospective wives, and the Megillah tells us that the process. The Megillah tells us the process that the ladies had to go through before they met Achashverosh, and it's quite crazy. It says in the source number 5. Yeah, when it comes to each person, each girl's time to meet Achashverosh, and you have to prepare yourself for 12 months, and that's, you know, how long they spend getting ready. And it says each girl has to spend you have to spend 6 months in shemen hamor, which is the oil of myrrh. And then it says and then you have to spend another 6 months in sort of general women's perfumes and cosmetics. Now, I don't understand. The first 6 months, we know exactly what Esther was doing. She's spending time in shemen hamor, in myrrh oil. The next 6 months, we have no idea what happens. It's sort of like, general perfumes and spices and whatever. So it seems to be there's a particular significance about this shemen hamor, that Esther's spending 6 months in it, and that's the only thing we know specifically. Everything else is, general cosmetics. There's something specific about shemen hamor. What's going on? It bothered me for ages. And I found the answer in the most unlikely place. I couldn't believe my eyes. It's so random. Seemingly anyway. It's in a medrash about Avraham when he's leaving his homeland. Like that has anything to do with Esther and the Purim story. But listen to this in source number 6. Omar of Berechia. What was Abraham Avraham compared to? A jar, a vial of apoi pilsimon, mukefes tzomid basil. and it was just tightened with a lid. Umunach bezovis, and this jar of fluid, upper pilsimon, was sitting in a corner. And there was no smell that was emitted from this bottled jar of upper pilsimon. And and when this vial of perfume or oil was shaken, its smell would come forth. And this is what Avraham is compared to, because he was sitting at home and he was in his hometown surrounded by his friends and family. And he was like that oil that needed to be shaken in order for its true smell to come forward. It could be that oil could be sitting on a shelf its whole life thinking, I have no smell to give. And as long as it was stationary, that was true. But as soon as you shake this jar, the smell, the beautiful smell of Apei Pilsimon comes through. And this was what Avraham symbolized, or what it was a metaphor for Avraham. He needed to be shaken. He needed to be taken out of his comfort zone in order for that fragrance to come forth, a fragrance that he may never knew he had. What has this got to do with the Purim story? Look at the Matnas Kahuna on source number 7. He says, Apei Pilsimon, what's this mysterious oil? It's Shemen Mo. It's that same oil that Esther spent 6 months in. The oil that you have to shake to know that it has a beautiful smell. What's Esther being told here? Esther's being told that you've been taken from your family. You're in an uncomfortable, unfamiliar, threatening environment. But guess what? This brings out a strength in you that you never knew you had. It brings out a fragrance that had you sat on the shelf comfortably your whole life, you would have never introduced to the world. You would have never made the world that much more beautiful. So sit for 6 months, not in the Shemen Hamor, but in the message of the Shemen Hamor, and know that when you're shaken and when you're drawn out of your comfort zone, it's not just something that's going to make you miserable and make you difficult. It's going to bring out a beauty in you that you never knew you had. That's why Esther spends 6 months in specifically that oil. Everything else is immaterial. But when you've spent 6 months in Shemen Hamor, you start to internalize not just the oil, but its message. That when you're taken out of your comfort zone, there are strengths and capabilities that come out that you never knew you had. And this is why we get sara'as on our houses when we go to Israel. Because look what Rashi says. It says, B'shoirahi in source number 8, B'shoirahi lahem. The presence of these nagaim, the tzara'at on the houses, were good tidings for the Jewish people. Not that they may have known it. Because the Emorites, they hid gold and silver in the walls of their houses. The whole 40 years that the Jews were in the desert, they hid them. They hid the jewels in the walls of their houses. But and through the destruction of their house, the news that they thought was so annoying, so frustrating, and so disappointing, they found the treasure in the walls. This is the message that Sora'as tells us. Sora'as is not so bad. It's, if you'll forgive me, it's a skin-deep interpretation of what's happening here. It's true, Sora'as comes with an uncomfortable reality that you might have to break your house, you might have to leave the camp, it might be embarrassing and uncomfortable, and guess what? You might have to make yourself a better person for getting Sora'as. But ultimately, let's look at the bigger picture. I know maybe I can't say that for trademark reasons in Bushy Shore, but let's look at the slightly larger picture of what Sora'as is giving you. It might just give you jewels. It might just give you another depth in your life, a quality of life that you didn't know you had. So don't be so quick to dismiss Sora'as. I heard the most beautiful story. If I hadn't seen it on the news, I wouldn't have believed it myself. This happened last year. In Israel, there were some massive levayas, massive funerals that occurred during COVID. And understandably, the security and police forces were trying to manage these massive gatherings in a way that was COVID safe. One of these police officers who was managing a funeral and trying to maintain some sort of COVID safe social distancing, whatever it was a man called Barak Dadon. He's an Israeli police officer. In that funeral of thousands of people, there was one stone that was thrown And that one stone hit Barak Dadon, this policeman, in the head, and he collapsed and was admitted to hospital. He went to hospital unconscious, and they did a few scans on his head. And the doctor comes back to him and his wife, who was expecting their second child. The doctor says to him, the good news is that we found no internal bleeding on your brain, and you're going to suffer no long-term consequences as a result of being hit on the head. The bad news is, I have to ask you, Barak Dadon, have you ever had a surgery on your head? And Barak says, no, I'm a healthy man. I'm in the police force. I've never had a surgery on my head. He said, we found a massive brain tumor on your brain. You might not have known you had it, but we need to operate. And at that moment, they were petrified. You know, it had been another normal day, and all of a sudden they'd gone to hospital with nothing more innocuous than a knock on the head and found a brain tumor. Thank God they operated on him, they saved his life, and he's back to work. And I think this sounds like the Torah. It smells like the Shemen Amara. These things that on the surface, they seem so difficult, but they bring out an inner beauty in some mysterious way. And he might have been cursing his luck as he drove in that ambulance to the hospital to get a brain scan for something that would save his life. How do you think he looks at that stone being thrown today? And I'm not here to say we should throw stones at policemen. I'm not saying that. That is not what we should do. But sometimes in life, things seem so difficult. But when we just hang in there and we start looking at a slightly longer perspective, a slightly bigger, broader view, there's a beauty and a divine plan that comes through. And this is the message of Torah. This, by the way, this idea of difficult situations, bringing out new capabilities in ourselves, has halachic ramifications. It's actually brought in Jewish law. Get this. This is amazing. Source number 9, Bava Kama. We're talking here about the laws of shepherds, watchmen, people that are in charge of looking after livestock. We'll just do it in English. The Mishnah says that if an animal pen was breached at night, or bandits broke in and breached the pen, if the sheep then went and caused damage to someone else's field, the owner is exempt. The Rabbi said, this is when the animal dug its way out. The owner, or the guy who's looking after the sheep, is only exempt from damages when the animal, let's call it a sheep, when the sheep digs its way under them, because sheep don't dig. But if it didn't dig, what would the ruling be? So he answers the owner would be liable. If the sheep just walks out and chews on someone else's strawberries, the owner's going to be liable. So what is the case of the animal digging its way out with the result of the owner being liable? Surely it's an eventuality he could not have foreseen. You know, at the end of the day, how are you going to tell me, where would be a case where a sheep digs its way out and we're going to say it's the owner's fault? How would such a case ever exist? That sheep digging under a fence and it's the owner's fault that he did that? It's such a weird eventuality. Rabbi is referring to the later stage of the Mishnah where the animal was left in the sun. This is utterly negligent. What is the reason for this? For we would say to the guard that you should have known that since you left the animal in the sun, the animal would escape by any means necessary. If you're looking after a sheep and you leave it in the sun and the sheep's in pain, don't turn around and say, I could have never have known that sheep would start digging. I could never have known that. Because when an animal's in pain, there's a whole new level of abilities and capabilities that are accessed. There's a whole new game here. There's a new scope of possibilities, because when you're in pain and when you're out of the shade and you're in the sun, you can do things you never thought possible. How many times do we hear these miraculous stories of people finding immense strength at life-threatening times? When you're in pain, when you're out of your comfort zone, there's a new Shemen Hamar type ability that comes through. There's a fragrance that you'll produce you never knew you had. You'll reach things you never knew you could. If we live in the comfort zone, there are realms of possibilities that we could have accessed that we'll never know existed. And sometimes we have to step out into uncomfortable and difficult situations to find that we're capable of this. You know, on a personal level, I haven't been a rabbi for all that long. Yeah, it's been about 4 or 5 months. There's a lot of stuff I've never done before. And it's easy to feel that, you know, this is overwhelming and this is difficult. I mean, filing for expenses is the most unbelievably complicated thing. I knew I could have done that. It's a good system, but I don't know this. I don't know how to do this. And I've got to keep track of receipts. And like, if you'd have said to me a year ago, mate, you're going to be bossing this system, you're going to be filing expenses with your eyes closed, I'd be laughing you out of the park. But you put yourself in uncomfortable situations. Out of that comfort zone, there's a new realm of possibility, and it's amazing. So, this is, the first thing about Tzaras. I'm here to debunk this not invalid perception, but maybe narrow perception that Tzaras is bad. And we've said two things that Tzaras give us. Number one, Tzaras informs us that we're living in a spiritually sensitive world with spiritually attuned bodies, such that when we have a spiritual thing that needs fixing, our body reflects that. So to live in such a spiritual way is a very positive thing. And secondly, when we find Tzaras on our house, when unfortunately we might get hit in the head by something, when we might be drawn out of a comfort zone, there's a treasure that's waiting behind the wall. There's something that we never knew was there. And Tzaras might be uncomfortable and might be difficult, but ultimately it brings you to a better spiritual future. It might bring you to a better financial future. And these uncomfortable situations are designed to bring out capabilities we never knew we had. So Tzaras is not all bad. And this brings us to the end of part 1. And now we're going to move on to part 2, which is, I don't know which one I prefer. They're both fantastic. Number 2, part 2 is give it all you got. We're going to go back to the negative perception of Tzaras. And the Gemara in Nedarim paints a pretty bleak picture. So if you see source number 10 here. Source number 10, there are several people who are spiritually considered dead. And hold tight, don't jump at me, right? They're considered dead. One of them is a pauper, and another one is one who is afflicted with tzaras, this malady of the skin. Now, a pauper is considered dead. As it is written, when God told Moshe it was safe to return to Egypt from where he had fled, for all the men who had tried to have you killed are dead. And that's the Shemos 4:19. Now, they, however, were not dead, as the commentators explained. The people, Dosnan and Aviram, who had tried to have Moshe killed, were not dead. They came out with the Jews, and they were in the desert making trouble. They weren't dead. So obviously, it must refer to something, and the commentators explain that it's because they had become poor. So you see, a poor person is considered dead. Now, one afflicted with tzaras is also considered dead, as it is written when Miriam is afflicted with tzaras for speaking in an inappropriate way about Moshe, and Aaron beseeches Moshe to pray for her recovery. Please do not let her be like one who is dead. Now, the question is, why are they considered dead? What does that mean? I mean, the guy's not dead. A poor person can get wealthy. And what is there, some miraculous music that plays from heaven and a light shines forth and he comes back to life? No. I mean, he just wants, and the Matzera, the guy who has Tzaras, he goes out the camp, he does teshuvah, he does repentance, and he comes back in. He's not dead. So why does the Gemara say they're considered dead? And a second question, which is a beautiful question, because not only is the idea beautiful, but we're going to say it this Shabbos. There's a line in Hallel that we say every Rosh Chodesh, and this Shabbos is going to be Rosh Chodesh, and it's going to be no different. We're going to say this line on Rosh Chodesh, which seems slightly askew. It seems slightly odd. This is source number 11. We say, Nikimi me ofardo, that Hashem, he raises the dust from the poor. So he raises the poor from the dust. I've made a mistake here. He raises the poor from the dust. And May Ashbais, and he raises up from the dump heap, Yorim Evya, and he raises the destitute. And I've forgotten to put the next bit in. Sorry, guys. I've missed out. And he says the next line is, Lahishivi im Nedivim, to place him with the donors, im Nedivei Amai, with the donors of his people. Now, let me ask you. You're taking this poor person, and he's got no money, he's completely destitute, and you're raising him up to place him with the donors, the divei amai, the sort of the people who donate things in the community. It's a bit funny, no? It's like, why don't you just raise him to the rich? Just say you take the poor people, you make them wealthy. Why are you saying this weird phrase of divei amai? You're putting him with the donors. And in this slightly, maybe strange turn of phrase, is the most fundamental Jewish lesson that you're going to hear probably in a while. And that's this. Right, and that is this. Sorry. What's the opposite of someone who is poor? The opposite of someone who is poor in Judaism is not someone who's wealthy. It's someone who gives. That's the difference. So when we say that God takes someone who is poor and puts them with the givers, that is the ultimate opposite of someone who is poor. That's the reason why we put them with the donors. To make them wealthy is only half the battle. It might not even be half. But when you make someone rich in Judaism, you're not rich, you have the ability to give. And if you don't have the ability to give, as a Jew, you are considered dead. This is why the Gemara in Nedarim says what it does. It says the reason why a Metzora and an Oni, as someone who's poor, are considered dead is because they lack the normal range of opportunities to give. And if you can't give as a Jew, you're dead. And when you can give, you are the wealthiest person spiritually that there is. That's why these two are completely juxtaposed. Now, there's an amazing story. There's an amazing story that I heard actually on the BBC about these women who were French resistance fighters. When France got invaded by the Germans, they were non-Jewish ladies who decided to join the French resistance. Now, towards the end of the war, the Germans started really clamping down on French resistance, and 4 of these ladies, these non-Jewish French ladies, were taken into a concentration camp called Ravensbrück. Now, as in all concentration camps, these people were treated horrendously. And this article on BBC, which honestly, it gave me shivers down my spine, it said that they survived. I'll just read it. They survived this concentration camp by creating a network of friendship. And in the camp, they had a tradition, which would involve passing around a bowl of solidarity, and everyone would put in a spoonful of their soup, and they would then give the bowl to the woman who needed it the most that day. And that was what got them through. They took a spoon of their meager provisions for that day, put it in a bowl in the middle, and they decided who needed it the most that day. And they gave that person an extra 4 or 5 spoonfuls of soup. Now, let me ask you, try, as difficult and as honestly impossible as it is, to put yourselves in their shoes, or maybe just imagine the situation. Who do you think felt more alive during that ceremony as they're passing around the bowl of solidarity and everyone's putting their spoon of soup into the middle to give it to the one who had a hard day? Who feels most alive at that moment? The recipient of those extra 5 spoonfuls of soup, or those who gave it? And I put it to you that those who gave the soup felt more alive in that moment than the recipient. Because to give is to become alive. And to take and to hold to yourself, or to be deprived the opportunity to give, that's a death. Rabbi Sachs famously said that more valuable than the gift is the opportunity to give. And how true that is. How true that is. I think it was even, was it Roosevelt? He said, if you move into a new area, knock on your neighbor's door and ask to borrow some eggs. Because you think that as a neighbor, you have to give. What will truly create a sense of endearment is giving other people the opportunity to give to you. So you knock on the door, don't lend them eggs. Ask if you can borrow eggs, because when you give the opportunity to give, that's what brings people to life. This is why we say in Hallel that Hashem puts the poor people with the givers, because the opposite of poor is not rich. The opposite of poor is giving. And in Metzora, the guy who has tzaras, he has to leave the camp. He has to go out of the community. He has to sit by himself. It says levodod. He has to be completely isolated. That's a death. He's not a part of a community that he can give to. The range of opportunities that he has to give has just disappeared. That is beautiful. Oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not. That's a death. But to come back in, to re-enter society and not be a taker, but have your chances to give re-established, that's the most amazing thing there is. And it could well be that, oh yeah, this is what we say in source 12. Kol yemei asher hanega bo yitzmo. Tomehu bodod yeshev mechutz lamachane moshavah. He has to be alone. He's outside the camp and he has not got the normal opportunity to give. That, says the Gemara in Adorim, is a death. Now, it could well be that the reason why he got Tzaras was because he was stingy in the first place. And this is the Gemara in Arachin says, it says, yeah, one of the ways you can get Tzaras is through stinginess. Because it says that he owns, so that he that owns the house shall come and tell the priest, saying, there seems to me to be, as it were, a mark in the house. And the school of Rabbi Shmuel taught, the verse calls him the one who owns the house. It's my house. Why? Because he's stingy and he sees it as being exclusively his. Someone who is stingy, someone who does not give, his punishment is to leave the camp. You don't want to give, so you are deprived of opportunities to give. And it's only when you learn to give that you're welcomed back in. Similarly, I heard it explained that in source number 14 here, that part of the Tzaras process or declaring a house as having Tzaras is when you clear out the house of all the things that were inside it. So think about this. There's a guy who's always said, I can't host people. I don't have this. I don't have that. I don't have enough food. I don't have enough couches. I don't have comfortable rooms. When he gets Tzaras, when that house becomes afflicted, the entire house is cleared out to the street. And guess what? Everyone can see and judge for themselves whether you really didn't have the means to host people, whether you really didn't have the means to give, or whether you were just being stingy. But let's not forget the idea that we had in the beginning, that the idea of Tzaras is to isolate you so that you can come back in. It's to have that spiritual sensitivity to realize that there's something wrong and mend your ways and become a better person. It's not just about punishment. The goal of a Mitzvah, the guy who has Tzaras, is to come back, but to come back a more spiritually attuned, more giving, more alive person. And that, for me, folks, is why I think that Tzaras gets bad rep. So don't forget, guys, that Tzaras isn't all as bad as you thought it might be, that it's a spiritual sensitivity. It brings out strengths in us that we didn't know we had. And ultimately, it reminds us that to live is only to give. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. Very enlightening.
Thank you. Really, really lovely. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys.